Coming along.
Well, it's been quite a hot day here in California. It's been hot, 82-degree weather, and so I'm running an air conditioning unit. So if it gets loud, I'll turn it off. And it's election time here in the U.S., so there's a lot of mental health challenges going on all around us. It's a very perfect conversation topic.
Yes, it is indeed. And so just to give our audiences a little bit of overview of what we're going to be doing is that we're going to introduce you in a bit and essentially try and get to know you as a person, but also try and get to know the work that you're doing currently. And especially our topic today is about mental health. We're on a series roll here about talking about the new phase of mental health. And I've been doing this for the last 3 months or so, trying to get various perspectives from different angles on this topic. So today, you've graciously accepted to join us and give your perspective from a very different side on mental health. It's the East meets West approach around mental health, the Ayurvedic approach to mental health. So thank you for coming, and I am going to get started right away into getting to know a little bit about you itself. Is what's your story, and what got you into being into this field of mental well-being, and especially as your current role as an executive and well-being coach?
So my story is sort of had a lot of twists and turns along the way. So I'll try and compress it to a simple story. But I was born and raised in Hong Kong to Indian parents, and then I came to Canada first, and then came to the US to do my mechanical engineering education. I worked in the engineering world and then went and did an MBA, and then worked in the executive ranks of auto industry and tech industry. And, you know, in the more senior I got in management, the more crazy life got. Very, very stressful roles. And I remember two people that I really admired in my career, people that were executives, that were very powerful, did very good work. Two of them that I admired had heart attacks along the way. And at that time, they survived, but at the time, it was thought that heart attacks were related to diet, and there was not really a connection to stress. But these were two very healthy people. They used to run marathons, eat pretty well. And it wasn't until years later that the medical establishment started to make the connection of stress and lifestyle with heart disease. And of course, I went through my own stresses and possibly on the same path of self-destructive stress in my life. And I ended up leaving the corporate world. I ended up starting a tech startup, and that was an extremely stressful time. And from that mess, I finally emerged and said, you know what? I need to really give back to society and go into a field of bringing the Vedic wisdom. So very specifically, the yoga traditions, the meditation traditions, the sort of mind-body medicine traditions back into that corporate world. So when I exited the startup world, I started a coaching practice. And I found that my executive clients all face the same stresses and pressures that I faced in my career. And a lot of times these are very highly functioning, intelligent people that have very mild situations on the spectrum of, let's say, mental illness. So they might be having some anxiety, they might be having some stress, they might be having some depression. And if they go to the doctor will say, well, let me give you this pill. And if this pill doesn't work, let me give you another pill, without ever trying to understand what their situation was. Or they would say, you know what, go see a therapist or go see a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And what I started to discover is the Vedic tradition, the yoga tradition, has this entire system called Ayurveda. And Ayurveda is the mind-body medicine system of ancient India. And actually gives us a lot of clues and a lot of insights into how to manage our modern executive life better, our modern life in general better. So that was what attracted me to it. And as I started working with different clients and noticing massive improvements in their life, just from very simple lifestyle changes, I started to realize that, yeah, when we talk about mental well-being, there's a spectrum, and there's some people that obviously need, serious medical interventions, but there's a massive part where just simple changes can have a remarkable effect on their life.
I probably should unmute myself as well as I have this conversation with you, rather than just trying to have a conversation with this. So no, thank you very much, because that's an interesting take from moving through several positions, like being an engineer, and then getting into the executive role, and then stepping into a totally different world altogether. I know that you're also currently going through an election for yourself, not just the U.S. elections, but in your district. So tell us about your role there, and what are you what are you trying to get elected back into?
Mm. So once I left this, crazy startup existence and I started my coaching practice, part of my overall approach was to really give back to the community and sort of pay it forward in a way. And so one of the things I did obviously was start the coaching practice and go deeper into my yoga and meditation and Vedanta studies. But the other thing that I did was I ran for public office for my local health district. So we have three communities: Manhattan Beach, Redondo Beach, and Hermosa Beach, which are these three communities that are just outside of Los Angeles, within Los Angeles County. And we have our own health district. And so in that health district, there are five elected officials that oversee the board of directors. And so I've been on that board now for almost 4 years, and now I'm up for re-election. So I'm in the middle of campaigning and speaking to constituents and doing debates on, getting re-elected to this board. And what I'm really impressed with this health district is it used to operate a hospital, and it finally shut down the hospital and turned itself into a preventative wellness agency. And so their primary goal is to basically take about a $15 million a year budget and deploy it into programs in the community around wellness. And that includes things that are near and dear to my heart: meditation training workshops, yoga workshops, free yoga classes. There's a fitness center. There's senior programs to take care of seniors. And there's also purpose workshops, which in the Vedic tradition we call dharma. But the idea of dharma is basically helping people understand their life purpose. And so I'm on the board of that and about to run for re-election. And it's a little bit contentious right now because we're about to redevelop a campus that's been aging and falling apart. And there's a lot of, the word is NIMBYs, not in my backyard people, that are saying, no construction, don't build anything, let it fall apart, don't rebuild anything, we don't want any construction. And so it's been a bit contentious. And one of the people running against me is a psychiatrist. And so the conversation around mental health has come up quite a lot. And part of my my campaign has been, look, we can improve happiness and well-being, but it doesn't always require a pill. It doesn't always require medication. And in the U.S., we have a massive pill problem. We have opioid addiction and overprescription of medications, and people don't adjust their lifestyle. So they continue to go to bed late, watch late night TV, gorge on social media, eat processed foods, get up late. They don't exercise. They don't connect with community in a real way. And then they go to the doctor and say, I'm feeling depressed. The doctor says, okay, take this pill. And they take the pill, and it's sort of this, terrible cycle. And so I believe that, the start begins with, from Ayurveda, which is get the right daily schedule in place. What's the right time to wake up? What's the right time to eat? What's the right food to eat? What is the right community to involve yourself with? Are you spending time and really connecting with people in a real way? Are you overdoing your engagement on social media? All of these kind of things.
Well, I think the important piece that I got out from it is a shift in the approach from being a reactive medical unit to being more on the proactive side. So good on you, and hopefully you get elected back into the district region. And best of luck on that component.
Thank you very much.
So I'm not sure why this is not showing the way that I want it to show, but let me see if there's something you can do. But essentially, the next question that I have for you is really about the book that you've written, The Business Casual Yogi. Tell me about the book. Tell us about the book. What inspired you to write this book, and what are the key things that would come out from you think would be things that people would enjoy reading from this book?
So the story actually begins about 20 years ago when I finished my undergrad in mechanical engineering, and I decided to travel to India to discover my roots. And so I went on a 3-month backpacking journey across India, and at one point went up to the Himalayas and decided to do a 4-day trekking expedition by myself, which I wouldn't recommend anyone in their 20s to do. But at the time, you don't know any better. So I strapped on a backpack and loaded up some dal and rice, lentils and rice in my backpack and a stove. And I went off on this 4-day journey, alone through the Himalayas with a topo map and a compass. And a few days into the journey, I ended up getting into some very deep snow and got concerned about this deep snow as is. So I turned around and started heading back. And I was pretty depressed and dejected at that point from not making my destination. And I had this goal to find myself in the Himalayas, and I ended up not really getting to where I wanted to go. And on the journey down, I ended up getting lost. I got below the tree line. I lost all the triangulation points that I was trying to triangulate off of. And I got completely lost in the wilderness. And I ended up in that journey trying to get out of being lost and trying to find my way to some water and trying to find a local village to get out of this mess. I ended up getting hurt. And so I ended up crawling for about 10 hours that day to reach a village who then took me in. And I ended up staying in that village for about a week to recover, and then decided, you know what, let me go to Rishikesh and find, this special place where people go to learn yoga, learn meditation. It's sort of this enlightened spot on the planet. It's where the Beatles went when they wanted to learn spiritual connection. So I was like, I got lost in the Himalayas. I didn't find myself. Let me go to Rishikesh. Maybe I'll find myself there. And I checked into a yoga ashram. This is a place where you go to study yoga. And I go to the morning yoga class, and I'm hobbling in. And at the front of the room is this very big, smiling Indian guy whose name was Vishwa Ketu. And my name is Vishwajit. And I thought, oh, interesting coincidence. And this guy ended up becoming a very dear friend of mine and has been a yoga teacher for the last 20 years to me. And so through him, I've gone deeper in my yoga understanding, and I've connected to the yoga community, which are, sometimes these hairy-fairy people, as he calls them. They're, a little bit disconnected from the real world. They're doing their yoga practice. They're dressed like hippies. They're dripping in beads and malas. And meanwhile, I went into the corporate world, where it's, we wear a business suit to work every day, and we talk business stuff, and it's very sort of tied together. But I maintained a yoga and meditation practice every morning. And I found that there was these two worlds. There's the yoga world and all these people seeking enlightenment and seeking happiness, and the corporate world where we're all just sort of on this rat race trying to make more money because we think maybe if we get promoted and we have a bigger job, we're going to feel happier. And when I left that corporate world, I realized that the teachings of the yoga system that I'd so long adopted in my life were actually an amazing tool to help those fellow, I guess, corporate tribe of mine to have a happier life and to have more success and more balance and more grounding in their life. So that's the inspiration, was why didn't I write a book trying to take these complicated teachings of Ayurveda, Vedic wisdom, yoga knowledge, meditation, chakras, and explain them in a language that makes sense for the everyday working person. And so I reached out to my old partner, Yoga Rishi Vishwaketu, who's this Himalayan yoga teacher that's known all over the world. And I said, will you help me write this book? And he's not, his English isn't that great. So I would interview him and then take those teachings and then translate them. And that's what we came together with, is the Business Casual Yogi, which is a very serious yoga book, but presented in a very approachable, practical language for the everyday corporate working person.
That's very interesting. And how has that book actually been doing on the shelves, essentially? Like, when did you write the book? How has it been going forward? And how's that become a part of your life?
Yeah, so the idea actually came about when I was sort of going through this life shift to be more in service. One of the things I volunteered to Vishwaketu. I said, look, you're a yoga teacher. If you ever come to LA, I will be your assistant. I'll carry your bags. I'll open the doors for you. And he used to come to this yoga festival called Bhakti Fest. Bhakti meaning devotional. It's sort of the hippie crowd. And there's thousands, tens of thousands of these people that get together in the desert of California to do yoga, to sing, to dance. And I decided to be Vishwa's assistant. And he comes and he teaches. Hundreds of people line up for his class. And one of the classes he was teaching, I was assisting and adjusting people in their warrior pose and their forward bends. And I thought the idea for the book came to my mind in that. And after the class, I put together a little chapter outline, and I went up to Vishwa and I said, hey, I got an idea for a book. here's my chapter outline. What do you think? And he said, this is great. Let's do it. And I said, why don't we pitch the publisher? Because the publisher was at that festival. Mandala Publishing publishes a lot of books on spiritual subjects, and they happened to be at that yoga festival. So I came up with my chapter outline, came up with my pitch, and showed up at the tent, and the owner of the publishing company was there, and I pitched him on the book. And he loved it. He's like, this is a great idea. And he said, but you're not an author, you're not a writer, you've never written anything. I don't really know if you can write. I like your idea. Submit us a couple of sample chapters and a proposal, and we'll see about it. So I was like, okay. So I put together a proposal, put together a pitch, wrote a couple of chapters for my chapter outline, and sent that in. And so we ended up negotiating the book contract before it was even written. So that was the first good, successful sign. And then, of course, I went down the writing process. It took about 1.5 years, almost 2 years to write the book, and very disciplined, sit, write. And once the manuscript was submitted, it was another 6 months of editing work and, clean up and back and forth with the 3 different editors, a development editor, copy editor. There's all these different stages, proofreading. And finally, the book came out in November of 2019. And so there are all these book talks lined up and book signings. And so we start off with a really good start. And then, of course, a few months in March, the pandemic hits. And so all the big book signings got canceled. All the big speaking engagements got canceled. I had a bunch of corporate speaking events I was lined up at. And a lot of the strategy of the book was to sell in these big corporate venues where they'll buy, 1,000, 2,000 books at a time. So that didn't manifest. But meanwhile, the book itself has been selling quite well just from online medium. And so the publisher seems quite happy. I'm quite happy with the results. And it's shelf. People aren't buying books off shelves right now. So they're flying off the Amazon warehouse shelf right now. But the book's available worldwide, and it's been selling all over Europe and Asia, and of course here in the US and Canada. And I'm quite happy with it. So I hope that people that are watching this go out and look up the book and consider buying it. It's sort of a culmination of yogic wisdom, Vedanta, the Vedic philosophy system. It's got a lot of knowledge on Ayurveda in there, and also a lot of stories from my coaching experiences. So people that I've coached and seen transform applying some of these principles. And so you can kind of live vicariously and make adjustments in your life based on some of the stories of real world people that I share. A lot of case studies in the book.
Okay, that's actually good. Like I wrote a quote here, and then I was just like, okay, maybe I shouldn't say it, but then I know me, and I will always say this. And I said, okay, he started off his journey trying to trek through the Himalayas, so he felt defeated, so he lost purpose. So the thing that I got out from it, and this jokingly, but it still is something that I would take into consideration, is when you lose your purpose, you go write a book. Is that right?
Well, I think when you don't have purpose, you really flail around, and that's one of the things that I realized in life is your sense of purpose is a guiding direction and a guiding light. And you're in this boat, and if you see the light in the direction, no matter the storm, no matter how it knocks you off path, you know which direction to reorient towards. And that's what, teachers and coaches and gurus and all these different people help you understand. What is your true north, so to speak? Without a clear sense of purpose, the waves keep knocking you in different directions. And eventually, when you're so far off course, you're like, wait a minute, this feels wrong. This really feels like the wrong direction. And then you start to ask the question, and then you find the light. So yes, you're correct. If you really are off purpose, eventually life sort of slaps you back into place. But if you can identify that purpose early on, and that's what many of these practices do, you can then, avoid all that heartache and just start on the right path from the beginning.
Okay. So I'm going to take us a little bit away from the questions and try and get to know you as a person. So what I have here is a quick fire round question. So we're going to do 2 rounds if we have time, but
Okay.
essentially it's just informal questions. I'm not going to give you much time to think about. It's just quick fire. So ready? Are you ready?
Go for it. And so I just have to give a quick fire response, right?
Yes, exactly.
Good.
We'll start with something simple. What's your favorite vacation spot?
Definitely Rishikesh. The yoga ashram in Rishikesh. But I have a mini vacation spot. I have a little mountain cabin up in the forest. So that's my mini Himalayas up at 6,000 feet. I go there alone and just do yoga practice, meditate, get away, get into a quiet place, and solo retreat.
Okay. If you could trade lives with anyone for a day, who would it be and why?
You know, I saw this earlier, and I thought hard about it, and I'm in a great spot now. So I wouldn't want to trade with anybody. Life is really good now. So only spot I'd like to trade with is me in a few years. So having a little bit more of that yogic ability, sort of the things that I'm cultivating. There's a thing called vidya, which is insight, and cultivating that ability to really see things very, very clearly, and not always things that are apparent. It's intuition. So that's what I want to trade with, is my future self in a few years from now.
Okay, that's good. Now, you mentioned it as well, and the world knows about what's happening right now in terms of the U.S. elections. If you could give one advice to all the presidential candidates, what would it be, and why?
Well, I don't know if one of the presidential candidates will take my advice. But I think that I always tell people, take a breath, right? And I'm going through elections now. Take a breath, always. But really working towards unity. Like, I think that's one of the things that is missing right now in the U.S. is really trying to drive towards unity, and we've become very, very divided. Everything is divided. It doesn't matter what the subject is, what the topic is, what the field is. There's division. And if I could give one piece of advice, is let's work on uniting whoever that can do this.
Okay. This is an easy one. What's the fastest speed you've ever driven a car?
167 miles an hour for 20 minutes in Arizona at a test track. I used to be an automotive engineer, so I used to test cars.
What was the make of the car you're trying to test?
It was a Ford Mustang Cobra R.
Oh, good one.
And it was a prototype, and it had never been over 140 miles an hour, and they needed a test driver to test it. And none of the Ford drivers were certified to drive over 150. And so I submitted my driving resume, and I've had some race training, and they said, okay, fine. So I was testing something that I'd redesigned in the engine system. And so they let me run the test myself. And so got to 167 miles an hour. And in 20 minutes, the rear differential caught on fire. And that's why we had to shut the test down. So they came out with fire extinguishers and everything.
You may want to add that to your profile. Like, it's like, I've also been a test driver that blew up a car at 167 miles per hour. Okay, the last question here before we get back on to our question is, how old were you when you had your worst haircut ever, and what style was it?
I think I'm pretty close to it now, because for the last 8 months, I've only been getting haircuts from my wife. So, but the thing about having a haircut for your wife is she messes up and it's the worst haircut. The next day, she's like, oh, that doesn't look right. And then she snips a little bit and fixes it. So.
Okay, let's get back to our discussion topic here, which is really about the core of what I wanted to get to. I know we have had some insight into this today, but our real topic today is around a very different perspective around the East meets West approach. I know from the Western medicine type of thing, it's always been about giving pills and so on. And the East approach is more of this holistic piece about mental healing. So approaching the body and the mind as one. So let us know your thoughts about the Ayurvedic approach to mental well-being, and share your thoughts about how on the philosophy of it, and also your practice into it.
Yeah, so I'm going to cover two kind of main areas. One is this concept of doshas, and one is a concept of what is called amma, or toxicity. So, in everyday life, like, we understand food, right? You know that if you eat a huge pizza, you're going to end up with a tummy ache if you eat too much, because you can't digest it. And so Ayurveda, as an approach to healing and health, is really obsessed with digestion. That's the number one thing. You know how in Western world they say you are what you eat. So in Ayurveda, what your diet is and what you eat is the most important thing, and how well you digest it. So if you have a very strong digestion, you can probably eat anything. If you have a weak digestion, then if you eat certain foods, you're going to end up with an upset stomach. Your stomach's not going to be able to digest. And there's a concept called Agni, which is the fire of digestion. It's the fire in your stomach, so to speak. And so if the fire is burning bright, you can throw things at it and the fire will consume and digest it. And it'll extract the proper nutrients and give those nutrients to your body, and it'll eliminate the waste through your colon out the digestive system. So when everything is working well, you fully and completely digest your food, absorb the nutrients, and discard the toxins. If your fire is not burning bright, if that digestive fire is a little bit weak, or you load too much on the fire, too much bad, poor quality food, then the digestion doesn't take place completely. And the nutrients aren't properly absorbed, and the waste isn't fully eliminated. So you end up with some toxicity. And this toxicity is called AMA, A-M-A. I know it sounds like American Medical Association, but it's just AMA. That's the word. That's just one of those cosmic coincidences. And so as this toxicity builds up and builds up, you start to have the indications of disease. You start to have imbalances. And so that's why there's this whole trend of fasting and juicing and cleansing, because with cleansing, you're trying to eliminate this toxicity that accumulates. So all that makes sense, right? From a digestive point of view. Ayurveda further says that digestion also takes place on an emotional and mental level. So there's also an Agni and a fire of digestion of the experiences you take in through your senses, what you take in through your eyes, through your nose, through your mouth, through all 5 senses, your hearing, all the experiences you go through, they also have to be digested. So if you have a healthy emotional digestive system, you can take a little bit of stress, a little bit of strain, and you process it, digest it, and there's no toxicity. You absorb the nutrients of your experience, and you eliminate the toxins of your experience. But let's say you face incredible trauma. Let's say you're a soldier that experienced war and combat. Let's say you're a young child that isn't equipped to handle adult-like experiences and you're abused or you go through trauma. Or you're just a person that is overloaded with stress in your life and work is so stressful and you don't take the proper time to digest that stress. Or you have a weak system and you can't handle all that stress. What happens is those experiences, though they have nutritive benefit, your emotional digestive system, your psyche, isn't able to absorb the nutrients and isn't able to eliminate the toxicity. And so you end up with this residual emotional ama, emotional toxicity. And this is what many people in our modern world face. They're carrying toxicity from experiences in their childhood or in their lifetime. They're carrying toxicity from experiences with their boss at work or their coworkers, or they're carrying emotional toxicity from just the environment, the election cycle or politics or the pandemic and what people are doing around them. And so this just tries to accumulate and accumulate. And in Ayurveda, everything in the mind and body is connected. You accumulate a lot of this emotional toxicity, it shows up in your body as illness and disease. And so we want to always constantly be cleansing the emotional system as well as the physical system. You choose clean foods, clean diet, right time of food to eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, good quality foods, not junk foods, not frozen foods, freshly prepared foods. Same thing with emotions. Don't take on a bunch of junk. And if you want to take on a lot of junk, fine, but make sure you have a process to cleanse that. So if I meet somebody, for instance, if I have a client that's a call center worker, they pick up the phone all day and people are yelling at them all day. They're taking on all this junk emotion. And if they don't do any kind of ritual to cleanse that on a regular basis, it accumulates and they start to have mental imbalances. Same thing with anybody in a customer-facing job faces that. So what are the techniques to cleanse that? Well, on a regular basis, meditation is one of those very powerful techniques that is a daily cleansing of the mind. Talking, right? If you have friends or sometimes a therapist, you talk it out and just sort of dump it that way. And for me, a great practice is journaling. You just journal. At the end of the day, write a few lines, and just by putting it out of your mind and into the physical plane, you're eliminating this from your body in a way. So for mild stress, mild situations that are coming up, you just sort of regular meditation practice, regular yoga practice, certain rituals, journaling, all of these things sort of get rid of these emotions. And balancing your intake, right? You have a very stressful job and then you do a lot of social media, it's too much, right? You can't handle it. If you have an easy job, not too stressful, maybe you can take a little bit more of junk emotions coming at you. If you have deeper seated things, then you have to get more creative. You have to get more deeper into detoxification of this emotional stuff. And there's a bunch of therapies and approaches in Ayurveda, from diet protocols, cleansing protocols, herbs, deeper meditations, deeper yogic practices that can sort of eliminate that. So that's the first sort of concept of emotional digestion. And you can think about it like not being able to absorb the nutrients of your experiences. Once you digest it, then you'll say, you know what, that was a really stressful time, but it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I fell off a mountain in the Himalayas, got lost, very traumatic time, but I've digested it to the point where I take out the nutrients, and those nutrients make me much stronger. So every one of our challenges makes us stronger as leaders. All make sense so far? Good. So the next concept, which is very important in Ayurveda, is it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And that's what I find in Western medicine. It's sort of the same solution for everybody. You have this ailment, this is the protocol, this is the approach. Whereas Ayurveda immediately recognizes that we're all different in our mind-body constitution. So some of us are more fiery, some of us are more airy, some of us are more earthy and grounded. And so they call them these constitutions. They call them humors almost, from ancient Greek medicine. They use the word humor. But it's a dosha. The Sanskrit word is dosha. And dosha means your tendency towards imbalance. And there's three main doshas called vata, pitta, and kapha. Vata is the airy element, a lot of air. You know, vata people are the ones who are very creative, very bubbly, very enthusiastic, always moving, doing, can't stop, can't sit still, lots of ideas, wake up in the middle of the night. Yes, vata, it's lots of creativity, right? And these people are very good at communicating. They're very good at marketing. They're very good at creative type work. They're very good at art and creativity. Then you have pitta people. And in the corporate world, everybody wants to be a pitta. Pitta is like, it's the fire element. It's the, taking charge and getting things done and project managing and, putting things in place and being a taskmaster and being task oriented. But the pittas are also the ones who get angry very easily. So vata is somebody who gets very anxious very quickly, gets anxious, gets kind of worried, gets stressed very quickly. And the reaction of a vata in a meeting when something goes wrong, right? The project goes wrong. The vata is like, was it my fault? Was I the one that screwed up? Did I make that mistake? And they get a little afraid. Whereas the pitta is like, it wasn't my fault. It was his fault. It was her fault. It was everybody else's fault. So they blame everybody else and they get angry and they get critical and they get judgmental. There's a lot of fire and heat there. And then finally, kapha is the very stable, grounded, sort of the more, can sometimes get a bit complacent and withdrawn. Was there a problem? I didn't think there was a problem. I thought everything's fine. They're almost a little too laid back. And the kapha is more of the earthy element, where they're very connected to earth. They're the counselors. They're the HR people that have a really good ear to listen. And so you see these vata, pitta, kapha showing up in different ways in the office, right? The vata is like, oh, it's so cold in here. And they're always putting on an extra layer of clothing. The pitta is like, I'm so hot, I'm turning red. I need to take a layer off. I need to turn on the AC. The kapha is, a little bit more insulated from those things. And so these things out of balance start to show up as different diseases. So when we talk about mental illness or mental imbalance even, there's a vata imbalance, a pitta imbalance, and a kapha imbalance. When we talk about diseases of the body, there's vata diseases, pitta diseases, and kapha diseases. So any Ayurvedic physician will first try to ask about your lifestyle. What's going on in your life? What are the factors, is your job a vata aggravating job, very creative with a lot of air travel? In Hindi, the word for airplane is hava jahaj, like airplane, a ship in the air, is because in the air. And so when you travel by airplane, it aggravates the wind element, which aggravates vata. So if you have a lot of travel and you're vata in nature and your job is vata and you eat a lot of vata aggravating foods, you're going to have a vata imbalance, which shows up as insomnia, digestive issues, constipation, a scattered mind, unable to focus. If you have too much pitta in your life, you're in charge of too many things and you got too many responsibilities and too many tasks, and you tend to be a pitta person and you're in charge of a lot of things and deadlines are getting missed and people are getting things done, you start to get angry and judgmental. And then that shows up as inflammation, shows up as circulatory issues, shows up as heart attacks, as I saw in two bosses of mine. And so that requires a cooling approach to cool it down. And kapha aggravation turns into withdrawal and sort of like withdrawing from the world and sort of getting lethargic, not able to get up in the morning, or having excessive weight or excessive sort of complacency if you have a kapha type of constitution in that. So I think the first thing to think about in Ayurveda is, what is your particular dosha? And so in my book, I put a dosha quiz. You know, I think it's in it's a chapter on your nature, who are you? And in that chapter, there's an entire quiz that starts to ask, how do you approach stress? What is your natural body and your natural physique? What type of hair and eyes do you have? What is your reaction to different food and digestion? How do you react when stress takes place at work? And from that, we try to identify, are you more vata, more pitta, more kapha? And then based on that, we can identify what is your typical imbalance when it comes to mental and physical health. And then what can you do to then balance that particular dosha? Does that all make sense?
Yes, it does. And I was just kind of going through it because while you were talking, I was trying to write down notes as well. And I did raise my hand saying I'm a water person. And then when you started going into the other elements, I was going, well, I'm a mix of here and there.
Yeah.
So I think my question, and more for the understanding of a lot of the audience, is you don't necessarily fall in one category all the time. Like you may switch between different doshas over based on experience, or different job profiles, or even just how you are presenting yourself, whether it's in the work environment versus in the social environment. So is it, but you'd have one particular type of dosha that you'd be more leaning towards, is that?
Yeah, the way I think about it is there's these three buckets. And the buckets each have some amount of liquid in them: vata liquid, pitta, and kapha. And based on your mind-body constitution, you might be a little excessive in one or two or three of the buckets, but usually one or two. So let's say you have a little extra pitta, a little extra vata, those two. And then based on your type of work, if you have work that aggravates it, it keeps filling that bucket. If you have a certain diet and lifestyle, you eat too many spicy fried foods, okay, we start adding up the pitta bucket. Oh, you eat too much raw food, we start adding up the vata bucket. You eat a lot of very heavy, greasy foods, okay, we start filling up the kapha bucket. And so if the bucket is partially filled because of your constitution, and then the bucket fills up more because of your work, and then more because of your diet, and then more because of your lifestyle, the bucket starts to overflow. And when the bucket overflows, it starts to damage the floor around it, starts to damage your well-being, and you start to have issues. So then we start to try and tackle that particular flow to clean up the mess and get the bucket at a lower amount. But before it manifests in disease, you just have imbalances. So if you show up to a Western doctor and say, you know, I've been feeling very anxious lately, they run a bunch of blood work and a bunch of tests, and they're like, look, your blood work's fine. Come back when you're sick, when you're really sick. But that little imbalance is just one bucket has gotten a little bit more full. So in Ayurvedic medicine, we can say, okay, let's start to reduce the bucket to get it back in control. Because once the bucket overflows, then the Western doctor can measure it. But you don't want to get to that point. You want to get it before the bucket overflows. And so we want to be conscious of which buckets are somewhat already full because of our natural nature, because of our physical constitution, our mental constitution. And then based on that, we want to make sure that we don't let that bucket get overflowed. So I know I'm naturally pitta, right? So if I'm naturally quite pitta and I have a lot of tasks and a lot of responsibilities and it's hot weather, my pitta bucket starts to fill up more than the other buckets. And it can overflow into pitta type issues, right? Heart issues, inflammation, acid reflux. These are all kind of pitta type. Irritable bowel syndrome. These are all pitta type things that can happen. And so I'm always conscious, oh, it's a little extra pitta, a little hot day. I need to eat cooling foods. I'm not going to go have, hot, spicy foods tonight. I'm going to have maybe a cooling meal that cools it down to let the bucket come down further. So to identify which of those buckets is already pre-filled based on your nature, that's where these dosha questionnaires can really help.
Okay. That's an interesting piece, because when you started going about this whole thing around the anxious piece and you go to a Western doctor, they do the blood test and then they say everything's okay, but you still feel that component still within you. And cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the ones that they tend to push you towards as well. So in my thought process, I'm just trying to look at it and say is like, okay, you've got CBT on one end, which is more of the Western approach to doing it. And what you're proposing is the Ayurvedic approach to looking at it, which is more on the proactive side before getting to what would be the CBT component of things. And I'm not just saying CBT, I'm just using CBT as an example, but it's one. So is it fair to say that the Ayurvedic approach is more on the proactive side of our thinking rather than reacting, which ends up being more Western medication type of?
Yeah, so it's, mental health obviously is very, very complex. There's an entire spectrum of it. And for people who have serious traumas, the Western intervention methods can be very, very effective, but, saving somebody's life. Somebody who's suicidal, and some of those interventions can be very, very. So I find Western medicine in general to be amazing for an emergency intervention when the bucket is well overflowed, the floor is already damaged, and we need emergency help. But where Western medicine doesn't have a very good model is what to do ahead of time. What to do when you're just like, if I go to the doctor and say, you know what, I just started yelling at every single person I know, and I'm getting these hot flashes, what should I do? And the doctor doesn't really know what to tell you. Whereas an Ayurvedic physician will say, well, listen, this is pitta aggravation. We need to start to adjust your lifestyle to reduce the overall amount of pitta in your life. So I feel from a preventative framework, Ayurvedic approach has incredible body and framework of knowledge for the prevention side. And the Western medicine has incredible body of knowledge on the treatment side. But they both have frameworks in both. So yes, if you're acutely sick, you can go to an Ayurvedic doctor, and there are treatment protocols that are very, very powerful. In the ancient Ayurvedic text, Charaka Samhita from thousands of years ago, there were treatises on surgery. Here's how to perform surgery. Here are the surgical tools that can be used. A lot of modern plastic surgery actually comes from some of those learnings from thousands of years ago that Ayurvedic doctors developed. So Ayurveda does span the entire system, but because we're sort of, we want things fast, we tend to go to the Western doctor when we have a serious issue. But what if when it's mild? What if you just work in a very stressful company? At that point, do you have to wait till you're so sick that you need medical intervention? Can we do things on a daily basis now to keep us in balance, to prevent ever having to go to the doctor in the first place? And being on a health district board, I know like our medical costs in the Western world are out of control. I mean, they're out of control, and people are sick all the time. And we have an over treatment in a way. There isn't a lot of effort being made for preventative frameworks because, again, they're not proven, right? It's like we know that if we spend time with friends, we feel happier. But until there's data and research, nobody will say it in the medical establishment. Well, we need the data. But sometimes just use common sense. And many of the Ayurvedic approaches are very common sense. You feel hot, eat something cooling. You feel ungrounded, do some grounding activities. Walk in the earth barefoot, right? Well, is there data to prove it? Not yet. It's coming, right? Meditation at one time didn't have any data to prove it, but it was known that it makes you feel happier. Now there's all this data. Oh yeah, if you meditate, you feel calmer, your blood pressure normalizes, your heart rate gets to a more balanced place, your respiratory rate improves, your focus improves, your overall sense of calm improves. Like now there's data. But at the time it was just common sense, right?
Well, I think it's a perfect opportunity to bring this little thing that you and I have been talking about. And well, I have to say thank you very much for being able to do this, but we're partnering with you to actually hold a 4-session meditation session that's happening in November through to December. Tell us a little bit about the primordial sound meditation.
Yeah. So first off, it's a silent meditation technique using a certain sound connected to the cosmos that you listen to. Because I know it sounds like, are we doing a gong or chanting or sound, but it's silent meditation. But I've been a student of meditation and a meditator for the past 20 years. And it was something I did to reduce stress, stay calm, and stay more effective. But about 5 years ago, I decided to enroll and study under Deepak Chopra, who I've been very impressed with because he has been trying to bridge the Vedic wisdom tradition with modern Western medicine and trying to prove a lot of the things that are that are known in the yoga and Vedic tradition, but proving it through research and data. So he's got partnerships with Harvard Medical School, Scripps Institute, UMass, all these institutions to try and prove this stuff. And he revived an ancient Vedic meditation technique and did a bunch of research with medical institutions on its efficacy. But what was interesting is he also partnered with a guy named David Frawley, who is one of the foremost Vedic scholars on the planet, recognized by the Indian government as the foremost scholar of the Vedic tradition, even though he's a Western guy. And what they did is they revived this ancient meditation technique that is connected to the time of your birth. And the way they understand it is when you were born, at the moment that you left your mother's womb and you manifested as an individual, that's a very, very special moment. And there was a particular vibrational quality in the heavens, in the cosmos, in the universe at that very moment. So we calculate based on the time of your birth, the location of your birth, what is that particular vibrational quality, and use that as a technique for meditation. And because it's Deepak Chopra behind a lot of this, there's a scientific understanding of why this is effective. So what is the science? And you can go ahead to that next page if you want. Teaching what is the science of meditation? Where did this come from? Where did meditation develop from? How does it affect your physiology? How does it affect your stress response? Really understanding the chemistry going in your body when you take on a meditation practice. Where did primordial sun meditation come from? How do these mantras, how are they developed? What are the layers of our mind, body, and spirit? What are they? And try to understand them and understand when you meditate, how you're transcending these different layers. And then, of course, what are the logistics? How do you set up a lifelong meditation practice that you end up doing every single day for a certain amount of time for the rest of your life? Like, what are the tricks and techniques to do that? And so part of that training is understanding what are the logistics of meditation, and then understanding what parts of your consciousness you're accessing. And as you access those different states of your being, how does it affect your life? How does that transform and change your life? And so it's not just, okay, here's a technique, go do it. It's like, here's a technique, but here's the entire framework and system to help you understand why you're doing it, which I find that when people take a course like this, they end up becoming lifelong meditators and they end up having massive transformation in their life. Because it's not just, okay, here's a technique, go do it. It's a contextual understanding. And so it takes time to teach it, and that's why it's taught over 4 sessions. And each session goes over, interactive discussion around what is meditation, where the challenge has been. And then we do a meditation experience together for 20, 30 minutes together. And so you sort of learn as you go. And of course, anybody that takes this, I will calculate their very specific mantra and teach them how to use that mantra in a one-to-one session within these 4 sessions.
Okay.
Did I miss anything, Alex, from what I've shared with you before about this?
No, exactly. I thought this was a great idea because of the conversation that we're having to actually talk about this, because it's something that, it's just information that's there, and just hearing it from you would give audiences more of an opportunity to know more of the details about this. And it's something that we'll be promoting over the next couple of weeks as we get into getting more people to join us for these sessions. So thank you very much for that perspective.
And we will be keeping it limited because, we want it to be interactive where we can sort of, ask questions, learn from each other's experiences, and really share. And so that's why we're limiting the number of seats so that we keep that interactivity available.
Yeah. Back to the thing that we were talking about again, and yeah, everything's related, but I want to go to this component of your role right now as an executive coach and well-being coach, and you're really focusing on dealing with executives who are like CEOs and big people out running big organizations. Like, to be honest, I've had experiences where they don't seem that it's important sometimes, mental health, and so they don't take it as seriously in many cases. How has your approach been to talk to executives, and why do you think they need this type of coaching at their level?
Well, I think that there's a few different paths, right? a very successful executive, and I've seen them, many, many times over now, in both in my career and as a coach. They hit a burnout point where everything just falls apart. Their marriage falls apart, their relationship with their children fall apart, relationship with employees fall apart. They're still hitting the results, but their life is falling apart, and eventually that catches up. So there's sort of this one path of, hardcore go-getter type A executive that burns out, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, what happened? Then there's the other type of executive where the business is going through a lot of frustration and they're looking to innovate. And they realize there's something beyond just being an operational leader. There has to be some sort of innovation element. And so innovation ends up becoming another entry point. Another entry point might be where an executive comes to me and says, look, we're having some issues in our P&L structure. So we're deep into spreadsheets, and I'm, trained as an MBA. I've run businesses for 20 years. So we're into Excel spreadsheets and looking at, margin structure. And it might start with a discussion, okay, what's driving the margin? How do we improve it? And then it becomes, oh, the sales team is the issue. And then all of a sudden the executive unleashes on the sales team, and we start to identify these behavioral challenges, these psychological behavioral challenges between the sales team and the executive team. And so that sort of opens up another door. And then it might be that the executive realizes, you know what? The problem I'm having with Jim is the same problem I am having with my daughter at home. So Sarah, my daughter, and Jim, my sales executive, I get the same problem with both of them. And then it starts to say, well, what's going on there? What's behind that? And then we start to get into a sort of more of a self-analysis of understanding, what has my journey through life been, and how are all those journeys lining up to certain patterns? And that starts to open the door for more of an esoteric conversation. Or it just might be, I had a person at UBS, right, a big bank, who was having a lot of anxiety when they were doing pitches. So like every time they went to pitch, they were having excessive anxiety, and they were losing business because of that nervousness that was coming, even though they're very competent for their role. And so we started doing a lifestyle analysis and started to say, okay, what's your lifestyle like? What's your day like? And started to find, oh, there's a lot of coffee drinking going on, 5-6 cups of black coffee, which is very vata aggravating. And the person is a vata personality, vata body constitution. And just speaking and talking is very energetic and very vata aggravating. So these 3 layers of vata overflowing the bucket, and sure enough, she was having insomnia issues and sleep issues. And I could tell by the time of night she was waking up that she was waking up in a vata period of day. So in my book, I covered these different periods of the day. So you can sort of diagnose, okay, there's a vata imbalance. So I said, look, you can't drink 5 cups of coffee a day. You can drink coffee, but it needs to be 2 or 3 cups. And furthermore, you have to add milk and sugar because these are vata calming foods. The milk gives it a groundedness and sort of dampens that caffeine vata aggravating quality. And so she started adding some milk and sugar to her coffee, restricted 2 or 3 times a day, and started getting up at the right times, and also cutting out raw food because she was eating raw smoothies erratically through the day, which is, again, raw food is very vata aggravating. But Western nutritionists say, oh, raw food's very good. There's a raw food diet. But for a vata constitution, it sets her off in vata with a vata job. So by making the lifestyle adjustments, she ends up going to the doctor, and the doctor says, oh, you don't need this medication. She ended up cutting out some medications. So medications she was dependent on all of a sudden weren't dependent anymore. But furthermore, she started showing up at the pitches a lot more calm and a lot more collected. And that was a major transformation to start winning business and growing the overall business that she was managing. So this is sort of this journey, right? Depending on where somebody's at, helping them see their behaviors and how they affect their performance in the workplace as a leader.
Okay, very interesting, because I know we're getting towards the end of the conversation. We may extend a little bit, but I'm just seeing this whole thing about a blend between understanding where Western side of thinking is around, weight loss and all those elements. And then you have a different approach, which comes in that complements in many ways, because it's like, okay, one size does not fit everyone. Here, you've got an approach to say, okay, how do we actually make sure that it's more relevant, and one thing that could work for one person may not work for the other person. is it fair to say that there's still a lot of a disconnect across the world in terms of trying to blend the two? Like you're one of probably a few handful of people that do this. Um, what do you think needs to be a progressive way to start looking forward on this element?
Well, I think the first step is to understand that, you know, it's just not a patient and a diagnosis. It's a human being that has emotions, has relationships, has jobs, has foods that they like, has hobbies that they like really looking at the whole person and say, okay, what is this person going through? What is their entire situation? So I think, you know, the medical system, I mean, I know many doctors are very good-hearted people, wonderful listeners, but they get 15 minutes with a patient. They're overbooked. And there's a reason for that. There's a business around that. So the patient always doesn't get heard, the full story. And, you know, the training in Western medicine wants to understand, okay, what is the disease here? How do I get to the root of this? I don't really care about all this ancillary stuff. But, you know, in mild imbalances, that ancillary stuff is the clue. It's everything. And so being able to understand this whole person, from a body level, an emotional level, and a spiritual level. What is their spiritual journey? What is their work in this world? Are they oriented towards their deeper purpose? Or are they way off course? And that could be part of the issue. What is their nature and constitution? Are they aggravating it? Are they in flow with their natural constitution? You know, some Kapha people, they can stay up late, no problem. But Vata people staying up late, that's a problem. Pitta people staying up past 10 o'clock, they're cleaning their closets and raiding the fridge because that's a Pitta sort of imbalance. The other tool that I use also is Vedic astrology, which is, you know, at first when I came across it, I thought, what does planets and stars and astrology have to do with anything? I'm trained as a mechanical engineer. I ran business. I'd read a horoscope in the newspaper and think, this is wacko stuff. Like, what does this mean? Like, it didn't apply. But as I discovered Ayurveda, and it started to make a lot of sense, I discovered yoga, and it made a lot of sense. Jyotish, which is the Vedic astrology tradition, started to have a lot of insight. And the underlying fundamental math is different. So if an astronomer says, oh, the moon is in this location in space, the Vedic astrologer says, yes, I agree, the moon is in that location. And that has a certain effect and meaning on our mind. The Western astrologer has a different set of math and says, no, the moon is there, but it's actually not physically there. So that's where I think things got lost along the way, is Western astrology is sort of not mathematically correct with the sky. And so everything's sort of maybe intuition based.
Mm-hmm.
But in Vedic astrology, you don't need the intuition because the mathematics is correct. And so I can oftentimes when a client is ready, and sometimes they're, you know, that's a little too far from the comfort zone. But I have had senior people come to me and say, you know, I heard you did this for a colleague of mine, this whole thing with the planets. Can we look at my planets? I'm like, oh, really? Okay. And you just start to see again at the moment of birth, where were the planets at the moment you were born? And what energies do they carry? Because Mars is a fiery planet and influences Pitta. So if you have a very strong position in Mars in your chart, you're going to have a Pitta tendency. I don't need a questionnaire to figure that out. If you have the moon, which represents your mind in a very difficult location, you might have some tendencies towards depression. So you have to do extra work to sort of counter that. So I use it as a self-awareness tool. Another, like almost like a SWOT analysis. In business, we have what are your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is a SWOT analysis of your journey in this particular life. And so I combine lots of different tools. And again, Western medicine has lots of great tools for managing a healthier lifestyle. I'm a big fan of the Blue Zones body of work. It was a work done by the National Geographic to find the happiest and healthiest people in the planet. And they found 4 regions of the world that people live the longest lives. They're many, many centenarians, and they're very happy. And they identified 9 factors in common amongst those populations that lead to a happier, healthier life. And lo and behold, they match up with a lot of stuff that's from the Vedic tradition. Move your body in a natural way, connect with your community, have time to downshift and get quiet, have social time with friends, eat plant-based foods, plant-slanted foods, I mean, all these things. And the health district that I'm on the board of, that is a program that we've implemented in our community to educate people about these 9 healthy living pillars from the Blue Zones, which has been validated by Western medicine. And one of the pillars is have a very clear sense of life purpose. Live a life with clear meaning. And of course, in Vedic tradition, we call that Dharma, knowing why you're here. And there's so Western, Eastern, they both have their powerful use in our lives.
Okay, thank you very much on that one. I know we are just past our time right now, but I would want to really get into one question, and we may not need to spend too much time on it, but we are going through a global crisis right now. We have a pandemic, which is probably on its second wave already, a financial crisis that goes along with it. And then with all the things that are happening with the Black Lives Movement and racism and discrimination altogether, job losses, it's an impact on the mental well-being of a person and a community. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it's a mental health crisis at the root of it all. At the end of the day, it's a mental health pandemic. We're all very fearful, right? Whether you like it or not, whether it's the economic situation, job security, disease vulnerability, people that you know that are suffering, all of it together, election cycles, and the politics aren't only in the US, all over the world they're facing these political challenges. And all of it we experienced through our mind. At the end of the day, we experience the world through our mind. And so if we can take care of our mental health, we can have resilience through this crisis. And I notice in my clients, the clients that are meditators and yogis, they don't seem to be as disturbed as the ones who aren't doing some kind of daily practice. So there doesn't feel like there's an end in sight. This thing feels like it's going to keep going for some time. And so all we can do is carve out some time every day. In Sanskrit, the word is sadhana. Some time every day. Maybe it's 10 minutes, maybe it's 5 minutes, maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 2 hours. Some time where you connect to the deeper you, the you with a capital Y, the higher self, the self with a capital S, where you just connect to that. And that may be a religious practice that you have. It may be a breathing technique. It may be a meditation technique. It may be playing an instrument. It may be going for a walk. It may be a hobby you have. It doesn't matter. Something that you do that takes you beyond your mind and body for a moment. And if you do that every day as a regular practice, and you do it in a disciplined way, it gives you the resilience to get through this crisis. The situation otherwise feels very bleak. And I believe we're going to see, and I've already seen around me in my own community, suicides, attempted suicides, medication overdoses. It's all around. People aren't able to cope and they don't have tools. And there's not enough mental health professionals out there to treat all the people that are having mental health breakdowns right now. So I'm a DIY person. When something breaks around the house, I get out the wrench, I try and fix it. And now with YouTube, I can figure out how to do plumbing, electrical, woodwork. And I believe in DIY mental health. As much as you can, take care of your mental health before it gets too serious. Do these very simple things that are part of the Western preventive health model or the Vedic tradition mental health model. Do something and do it every day. Whether it's a yoga practice, a meditation practice, a devotional practice, it doesn't matter what it is. Something that you like reading, maybe it's a daily walk early in the morning. Connect to nature, go outside, feel the sun on your face, feel nature, look at the trees. Doesn't matter if there's snow or no snow, just go out there and experience it. And these are all things that will give you resilience no matter how crazy life gets around you.
Okay. Thank you. I would almost assume those were like a final comments with a lot of thoughts around what people could do. Thank you, Vish, very much for this amazing conversation. I've written stuff all around, like there. That's the notes that I was taking, and there were a few things that really stood out for me. One was what you said is about live life that is clean, very important piece, just not physically within your body, but also mentally.
As clean as you can. Again, we have to be human too.
And then, that takes a lot of discipline. And I think that's one of the things that people struggle with is accepting the fact that, mental health is is a big part of life, especially in these times, and to kind of be disciplined in the way that we eat, in the practices that we put into place. But those are like some of the key things that I took forward among all the explanation around the doshas and everything. So I'm really excited to actually be part of that meditation session that we're going to be doing, and I'm finding my personal mantra through the process as well. And of course, I did take this one that when you lose your purpose in life, you need to write a book. So I'm going to start writing a book as well as I go through that. But before we leave, I'd like to say a huge thank you because this is a big conversation and it's not just one-off situations. That's why I'm so excited and passionate about the work that I'm doing with Next Evolution Ventures, is because that DIY mentality around this has actually got me into looking at, okay, where are gaps in the system that we can actually put things in place that can help people, help the masses, and make it affordable for the masses. And, that's my vision with this organization. We actually just changed our vision statement to actually, we are in the business of making lives better for people. And that's really, we're going to use innovation and design thinking essentially to come up with solutions. We don't want to fix the system. We just want to help the system so that we can help people and communities become more healthier as we grow. So on that thought, I'm going to ask you one last quick fire round question. Yeah. And that's essentially will wind up our conversation today. And the question is, if you had a movie made about your life, who would you want to play you in that movie?
Oh, that's interesting. I'm not that familiar with all the different stars and actors. I was told once that I look a couple of times Keanu Reeves and Denzel Washington. So either of those, for some reason, people have said, "Oh, you remind me of Keanu Reeves. You remind me of Denzel Washington." So maybe those might be either of them.
Well, I was supposed to leave on a very fun note, and I'd say once again, thank you very much for your support, and thank you, Amanda, for attending as well, and the rest of the people that will be attending and watching this through our YouTube live channel as well. Thank you very much again, Vish, and looking forward to keeping in touch and working on this topic for a better community.
Thank you, Alex. I applaud all of your efforts to do the work that you're doing, and I'm very honored that you had me today. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share this wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and so with that, we'll be signing off. Take care and have a good evening.
Okay.